respiratory system, the respiration, in which three major questions are asked: the structure of the respiratory organs, and then the mechanism of breathing, and the mechanism or physiology of respiration. So we're going to read all those three topics. So first of all, we need to know what is the respiration. What do you mean by respiration? So respiration, it is the biochemical process of oxidation of food and formation of energy. Means it is the biochemical process in which the food is oxidized. Food means glucose, C6H12O6. So this food, it is oxidized to form energy, but along with energy the byproducts formed are water and CO2 plus energy. Now for balancing we can keep 6 and 6. So this is the basic detail about the respiration. So first of all, we'll go for human respiratory organs. The most of the times the question is asked about the lungs, so I'm going to tell you about the lungs, and rest of the things are pretty much simple, so you can go along them yourself. So about lungs I'm going to tell you. So first of all, there are one pair lungs in human being. It's obvious. So where does the lung lie? It lies in the thoracic cavity. Now what do you mean by thoracic cavity? Thoracic cavity, it is the cavity inside the rib cage. So the rib cage, it is covered by muscles known as intercostal muscles. Now inside those muscles, inside that rib cage, the cavity is present. That cavity is called the thoracic cavity. So in thoracic cavity even heart lies, lungs lie. So lungs, it lies on both the sides of heart. Now lungs, it is spongy and hollow, and it is conical in shape. It's conical, and since it is conical in shape, so its base is broad and its apex is narrow. Now the area between the two lungs, it is called as mediastinum, where the heart, the trachea, the bronchi and the blood vessels lie. So when we draw the structure, it will be somewhere like this. First of all, we'll draw the larynx, and then the trachea comes. Now trachea bifurcates into two bronchi or bronchus, and then the lungs are present. Inside the lungs it form bronchioles and then alveoli. So basically these two lungs, and a diaphragm is present. Basically the area between these two lungs, it is known as mediastinum. So this all area is known as mediastinum, in which the trachea, the bronchi, the larynx and the heart and other blood vessels, they are lying. And this lung, it is surrounded by a two-layered membrane. It's surrounded by a two-layered membrane, and this two-layered membrane is known as pleural membrane, or you can simply call it pleura. Pleural membrane or pleura. Remember the name, lung is surrounded by pleura. And this question is even asked in objective. The membranes, the surrounding membranes of the lungs is known as what? So pleura is the correct answer. So remember the name, pleura, and this is the mediastinum, the space between them. Now what is the work of this pleura? It just protects the leakage of air inside the lung towards outside, and between the two pleural membranes, it is the two layered membrane. So between the two pleural membranes lies a fluid which is known as pleural fluid, and it helps to reduce friction of the lungs during expansion and contraction of the lungs. There is pleural fluid. So this is the basic structure of the lung. And now internally the lung, it is divided into three lobes. The right lung, it is divided into three lobes. So first lobe is here and two lobes are here. So this is known as superior lobe, this is known as the middle lobe, and this is known as the inferior lobe. Okay, so three lobes. Now this is not much necessary though. And this left lung, it is just divided into two lobes. Now why two lobes? Because heart is present near the left lung, so the area of the left lung, it is slightly smaller than the area of the right lung, so it is only divided into two lobes, the superior and the inferior lobe. So that's the structure of the lung. Pretty simple. Just write about the pleural membrane, mediastinum, and about the lobes, and with this we complete our lungs. And now we are moving on for the mechanism of breathing. So breathing is the process of inhale of atmospheric air towards the lung and exhale of the CO2 of the lungs to outside the body. Now it means that the breathing, it is the process in which the atmospheric air, it means O2, it goes towards the lungs, and the CO2 of the lungs, it goes outside the body. This mechanism is known as breathing. So it occurs due to the changes in the volume and the air pressure of the thoracic cavity. Now what that means is that when the volume of the thoracic cavity increases, obviously atmospheric pressure will decrease, because pressure, it is inversely proportional to volume. So when the volume of the thoracic cavity decreases, the air pressure increases, and vice versa. So due to these changes of the thoracic cavity, the breathing occurs, and these changes, they occur due to the changes in diaphragm, intercostal muscles, and the abdominal muscles. It means they are responsible for changing the volume and the air pressure of the thoracic cavity. Now in detail we're going to read about it. So it consists of two processes. First is inspiration or inhalation, and another one is expiration or exhalation. So first we are going on for the inspiration. So inspiration, it occurs when the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. See, the volume of the thoracic cavity increases, and since the volume of the thoracic cavity increases, the air pressure decreases. And the following movements, they are responsible for inspiration. First of all, what happens, we'll write point wise and then it will be easy. The first of all, what happens is that the external intercostal muscles contract. Now if you see the rib cage, I'll show you the figure. If you see the rib cage, you'll see that, if you see the rib cage, you will see that there are two types of muscles: the internal intercostal muscle and external intercostal muscle. So what happens is that whenever this internal intercostal muscle, it contracts, it pulls the rib cage down, and whenever this external intercostal muscle, it contracts, then it pulls the rib cage outwards. So these both muscles, they are responsible for increasing the thoracic cavity between the rib cage. So by name it is clear that inspiration means inhalation of the oxygen. So for inhalation of the oxygen, the cavity, it should have less atmospheric pressure than the pressure outside. It means that the thoracic cavity, the lungs, it must have less pressure than the pressure outside the lungs, and only then the air will come towards the less pressure area. So for that, it should have more volume. Now let's not get confused, I'll tell you in simple way. In inspiration, what happens is that the external intercostal muscles, they contract, and when they contract, it pulls the ribs upward and in outward direction. It means it pulls ribs in outward direction. Since external intercostal muscles are contracting, so pulls outside. And since it pulls outside, now diaphragm also becomes straight. Diaphragm, it is nearly dome shaped, but when it becomes straight, the area of this lungs again increases, so diaphragm also becomes straight. Now due to all these activities, the area of the volume of the thoracic cavity, it increases. So volume of thoracic cavity now increases due to all these activities. Now since the volume is increased, the air pressure decreases. Now because of these things, the air pressure in the lungs, it is now less, and atmospheric pressure outside, it is more. Now since the air rushes towards the low pressure area from the high pressure area, so since the lungs have less pressure and atmospheric air has high pressure, so from atmospheric air, oxygen rushes towards the lungs, and the oxygen, it rushes towards the lungs, and this is the process of inspiration. This is how the oxygen, it reaches towards the lungs, and this is about inspiration or inhalation. Now we are going on for the expiration or exhalation. Now expiration is just the opposite process of inspiration. In this, by name it is clear, expiration means that the exhalation of air, it means that the CO2, it should be gone outside the lungs towards the atmosphere. So for that, first of all, what happens is that the internal intercostal muscles contract. Internal intercostal muscles, they contract. Since the internal intercostal muscles is contract, it pulls the ribs inwards. So ribs are pulled inwards. Now again diaphragm, which is straight, it becomes dome shaped. So diaphragm also becomes dome shaped. Now due to all these activities, the volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. So volume of thoracic cavity decreases. You can write just opposite of the inspiration here. So volume of thoracic cavity decreases, so air pressure increases. Now since the air pressure of the lungs, it is more than the air pressure outside, so the CO2 which is inside the lungs, it rushes outside. So CO2 rushes outside, it means it comes out of the respiratory system towards the atmosphere. And this is how inspiration and expiration occurs. Now this is about inspiration and expiration, but the exchange of gases takes place inside the lungs. It means the CO2 which comes inside the lungs and the O2 which comes inside the lungs, O2 is absorbed by the tissues, and how the CO2 comes from the tissues inside the lungs, all these we will be studying in the physiology of respiration. Now remember one thing, this physiology of respiration, mechanism of respiration, pulmonary respiration, respiration, human aerobic respiration, all are same. It's just about the physiology of respiration, and the mechanism of breathing is different. Breathing and respiration are two different things. In examination, either it will be asked breathing or it will be asked respiration, but do not get confused if it is asked physiology of respiration, mechanism of respiration, pulmonary respiration, aerobic respiration, or respiration in human. It is just the same thing. So first of all, we'll write about the exchange of the respiratory gases, and then we'll move on for the physiology of respiration. So the basic knowledge how the respiratory gases are exchanged in the alveoli. So the gaseous exchange, we know it occurs in the alveoli of the lungs. O2 and CO2, there are respiratory gases. These are our respiratory gases. Now again, just that you do not get confused, I am telling what is the difference between exchange of respiratory gases and physiology of respiration. In physiology of respiration, we will read how the O2 and CO2 from the tissues, suppose these are the tissues and this is the blood capillary, means the blood vessels in which the blood is present. From the tissue, how the CO2 goes inside the blood, and from blood how the oxygen goes inside the tissue, we'll read in the physiology of respiration. But in exchange of respiratory gases, we read from blood towards the lungs, how the O2 from the lungs, it goes inside the blood, and how the CO2 of the blood, it goes inside the lungs. In this exchange of respiratory gases, we read about this lungs and blood capillaries. In physiology, we read about the tissue and blood capillaries. So while writing, you do not get confused, so I am telling this. Now O2 and CO2 are respiratory gases. We know that in the exchange of respiratory gases, it occurs in lungs, but in lungs particularly it occurs in the alveoli. If we draw the structure of lungs, we'll see that when the bronchi enters, it separates into bronchioles, and these bronchioles, they carry rounded or sac-like structures which are known as alveoli. Now there are about 150 million alveoli in each lung. Now outside this alveoli, there are connectivities in which the network of blood capillaries is present. Means in this tissues outside the alveoli, which is known as connective tissues, there are blood capillaries, and inside these blood capillaries, they are present very near to the alveoli. They are present so near that the wall of the alveoli and the capillary wall, they are fused together to form a thin membrane. So if we enlarge this figure, we'll find that if this is the alveoli, then and this is the blood capillary, then both the walls, they are fused together to form a very thin membrane, which is known as respiratory membrane. So the blood capillaries and alveoli, their membranes are fused, their walls are fused, so that they form a very thin respiratory membrane. Now gaseous exchange, they occur through this membrane. So oxygen, when it goes towards the alveoli from outside, we know that the partial pressure. Now what is partial pressure? First of all, partial pressure is a term which is used instead of concentration when we are referring to the gases. Particularly, partial pressure means the pressure of the individual gas in a mixture of gases. Suppose it is a mixture of gas O2 and CO2, then both the gases will have its individual pressure. So that individual pressure of oxygen and individual pressure of CO2, it is known as partial pressure. So basically when the oxygen comes here, the partial pressure of oxygen is more in the alveoli and less in the blood, isn't it? The concentration of oxygen is more in the alveoli, the concentration of oxygen is less in the blood right now. So due to this change, due to this pressure gradient or change in the pressure, the oxygen diffuses from the higher pressure towards the lower pressure. So from alveoli to the blood capillaries it diffuses, and similarly the CO2 which is present in the blood capillaries, which comes from the different parts of the body, it is more in the blood capillaries, its pressure is more in the blood capillaries, and in the alveoli the pressure of the CO2 is less. It means concentration of CO2 is more in the blood capillaries and concentration is less in the alveoli, so it diffuses towards the alveoli due to this pressure gradient. And in this way O2 diffuses from alveoli towards the blood and CO2 from the blood towards the alveoli, and in this way the exchange of respiratory gases occurs. After it goes towards the alveoli, it is carried again outside towards the external environment by expiration. We read about the expiration. So this is about the exchange of respiratory gases. Usually this question is not asked, still I told you for information, for precisement how the exchange occurs. Now the most important question comes here, the physiology of respiration. We're going on for the physiology of respiration. So the physiology of respiration, it can be studied under the following headings. First of all, external respiration. Now remember one thing, external respiration, exhalation and expiration, they are the different things. Means expiration and exhalation, they are different, and external respiration is different. It does not mean the same thing. Similarly, second topic is transportation of oxygen. Third topic is internal respiration. Again, the inspiration or inhalation, they are different things, and this internal respiration is a different thing. Do not get confused. So under these three topics we can study the physiology of respiration. Now the physiology of respiration, it is not much difficult as the difficulties of the physiology of digestion and all. So it is very simple. First of all, we'll write about the external respiration. So when we write about external respiration, this is about the diffusement of O2 and CO2. I'll tell you about this. See, first of all, during inspiration, we'll start from the beginning. During inspiration, what happens? Atmospheric air, it reaches in the alveoli. During inspiration, the atmospheric air reaches alveoli. Now how during inspiration? We read about it in mechanism of breathing. So directly during inspiration, atmospheric reaches towards the alveoli. Now after it reaches towards the alveoli, O2 diffuses in blood, isn't it? Now about this we read in the exchange of respiratory gases, how O2 diffuses in blood in detail. It means O2 diffuses in blood from alveoli. This is the second point, and this process is known as external respiration. This is about the external respiration. It means that the atmospheric air reaches towards the alveoli and O2 diffuses from blood into the alveoli. That is the external respiration, and it is over. Now we'll go for the transportation of O2. Now what this means, after the O2 diffuses in the blood, it needs to be transported to the different parts of the bodies, to the tissues, to be absorbed. So this is about that. So oxygen is transported from the lungs to the body tissues by the blood capillaries. So how it is carried? What happens is that when O2 diffuses in the blood, it combines with the hemoglobin which is present in the blood. So O2, it combines with the hemoglobin, okay, to form oxyhemoglobin. This is, suppose this is hemoglobin Hb, and this is the oxygen. So it combines to form oxyhemoglobin. For balancing we can compare. So 4 molecules of oxygen, it combines with 1 molecule of hemoglobin to form 1 molecule of oxyhemoglobin. So this is about the transportation of O2. How it is transported? Just when it goes inside the lungs, when it goes inside the capillary blood from the alveoli of the lungs, it combines with the hemoglobin which is present in the blood and forms oxyhemoglobin. It is transported in the form of oxyhemoglobin to different tissues. So now how it is absorbed by the tissues, we'll study about this in internal respiration. So this is our third topic, the internal respiration. Till now it is pretty much simple how it is transported towards the tissues. It is all about that from the beginning, not in much detail, but it is about what we'll write in the physiology of respiration. So in internal respiration, it is also known as tissue respiration. Okay, it is about the tissues. So basically it completes in two steps. First of all is dissociation of oxyhemoglobin and then oxidation of food. About both we are reading. First of all, dissociation of oxyhemoglobin. So this oxyhemoglobin which is formed in the transportation of O2, when the oxygen it combines with the hemoglobin, it forms oxyhemoglobin. Now what happens is that when it reaches towards the tissues, when it reaches outside the tissues, this oxyhemoglobin, being an unstable compound, it dissociates into hemoglobin and oxygen again. Means this oxyhemoglobin, which is an unstable compound, it dissociates into hemoglobin and 4 molecules of oxygen again, since it is an unstable compound, and outside the body tissues. And then this is about dissociation of oxyhemoglobin. Then we have oxidation of food. This is the second step. So what happens is that this oxygen, now it is absorbed by the tissues. So O2 is absorbed by the tissues. Now what happens is that the food which we eat, it is oxidized to form. The food which we eat, when it reaches towards the body tissues, different body tissues, it gets oxidized. Now again food is C6H12O6. When we eat the food and it reaches towards the different body tissues, and in body tissues already oxygen is present, because after all this process oxygen has reached towards the body tissue. So what happens is that oxygen, it oxidizes the food to form CO2, water and energy. H2O and water, they are useful. It gets utilized by the body in different works, but this CO2, it is a harmful gas, so it needs to be, and it is also an unnecessary gas, so it needs to be removed. So now finally at last we'll write how this CO2 is removed outside the body. We'll just write how the CO2 is carried towards the lungs, and after the lungs we know how it is removed by exhalation. We read about it in previously. So we just need to write how this CO2, it is carried from the body tissues towards the lungs. So if you are getting confused enough, you can even make the fourth topic, which is the transportation of carbon dioxide towards the lungs, but simply the thing to be written must be same. So first of all, what happens is that this CO2, it is carried towards the lungs in three forms. It means the process is the same. It gets absorbed by the blood and then blood carries it towards the lungs. But it is absorbed by the blood and then it is carried towards the lungs in three forms. So in what three forms it is done? So CO2 in three forms. The first form, it is in the form of carbonic acid. What happens is when CO2 it combines with the water of RBC. See, the CO2, it is in the body tissues. Now it goes towards the blood, capillary blood, to be carried towards the lungs. When it reaches the blood, RBC is present in the blood, and in RBC water is present. So this CO2 it combines with the water of RBC. It combines with the water of RBC to form carbonic acid. This is CO2 and this is water. When it combines, it forms H2CO3, which is known as carbonic acid. About 7% of the total CO2 it is carried out in the form of carbonic acid. This carbonic acid goes towards the lungs and it again gets dissociated and then it is expelled out, but this is up to the 7% will write. It is 7% of the total CO2 which is carried towards the lungs or transported towards the lungs in the form of carbonic acid. This is the first form. And about this carbonic acid we are also going to write in the chloride shift. About chloride shift I'm not going to tell you in this video, but again in chloride shift also we are writing the same thing. So it is the basic principle of chloride shift as well, that CO2 it combines with the water of RBC. So leave that thing right now. So this is in the form of carbonic acid. Now second form is that is carried in the form of bicarbonates. You need to remember the names, there is no other option. In the form of bicarbonates. First of all carbonic acid, second is bicarbonates. Now what in detail when we write about this, it is basically the same carbonic acid. This carbonic acid sometimes, except this 7% other carbonic acid which is formed, this carbonic acid dissociates here in the blood itself. It dissociates into H plus and HCO3 minus ions. This H2CO3 it dissociates into H plus HCO3 minus ions. This HCO3 minus ions is called bicarbonate ion. So it is carried in the form of this bicarbonate ion. H plus it is absorbed by the hemoglobin, it is used by the hemoglobin in chloride shift. Again we'll write this thing. So HCO3 it is carried towards the lungs. This is the second form. It means in first form in the form of carbonic acid, in second form this same carbonic acid it got dissociated into H plus and HCO3 in the blood plasma itself, not in the lungs. So it is carried in the form of HCO3 minus ions, bicarbonate ions. In the form of bicarbonate ions it is carried out towards the lungs. These are the two forms, and the last form is a British complex name is there in the form of, but it is easy, carbamino. See, remember, carbamino hemoglobin. Now I'll tell you how to remember this name. First of all, we know that CO2 it is in the body tissues. Now it goes towards the blood capillaries. Now inside the blood capillaries hemoglobin is present. Now actually hemoglobin it contains a group, amino group, or we can call it protein group. The hemoglobin which it contains protein group. Now this CO2 it combines with a protein group or amino group of that hemoglobin and forms this compound. So if this is the hemoglobin and this is the amino group NH2, the amino group of hemoglobin, then CO2 combines with it to form the compound HB, NH and COOH. Clearly I'll write C, HB, NH2, which is the amino group. So it combines with CO2 to form a compound which is known as CO. This hydrogen it goes and combines with CO2. CO2 means COO, and again one hydrogen of this goes there and H, so it is called COOH here. NH and COOH, one hydrogen of this NH2 it goes here and combines. Okay, so this compound is known as carbamino hemoglobin. Why carbamino hemoglobin? See, carbon dioxide is there, carbon dioxide combined with amino group of hemoglobin, so carbamino hemoglobin. So carbamino hemoglobin is the name. Now one more thing I'm telling you, 23% of the total CO2 it is transported in this form. So 7% of this, 23% of this. So in the form of bicarbonate about 70% is transported in the form of bicarbonate, the maximum. Again I'm telling you from the starting, from the beginning, so that you do not get confused. First of all, what happened is the external respiration. During inspiration, atmospheric air it reached toward the alveoli, and then alveoli diffused in the blood, which was known as the oxygen from the alveoli diffused toward the blood, which is known as external respiration. Now then transportation of oxygen, lungs to the body tissues. It is the process in which the oxygen which is inside the blood capillaries it is carried from the lungs towards other body tissues. When the oxygen from the alveoli it goes inside the blood, it combines with the hemoglobin and forms oxyhemoglobin. Internal respiration in two forms, dissociation of oxyhemoglobin. This oxyhemoglobin, when it reaches towards the outside of the tissue, it dissociates into oxygen and hemoglobin again. This oxygen it is absorbed by the body tissues, and whenever we eat food it reaches towards the tissues, it oxygen it oxidizes the food and forms CO2, H2 and energy. CO2 being unnecessary gas needs to be removed. It is removed in the form of three forms. First of all, carbonic acid it combines with the water of RBC here. Remember, these two can confuse you. So it combines with water of RBC in carbonic acid. If you remember the reaction, it will be much easier. So it forms carbonic acid, and 7% is removed in this form, and then bicarbonates. This carbonic acid it is it dissociates into H plus and HCO3 minus ions. This HCO3 minus ions are known as bicarbonate ions. About 70% is transported by this form, and then carbaminohemoglobin, the remaining CO2, after all these processes, the remaining CO2, it combines with the amino group of the hemoglobin, forms carbaminohemoglobin, and about 23% is carried out in this form. And this is all about the physiology of respiration. And with this we end our chapter. Wait till the next video, and if you have any confusion, comment in the comment section. Till then, take care. Thank you. Goodbye.